alone, and the person backing him was about to realize their turn was coming next. News travels fast in a small town. Scandal travels faster. By sunrise, everyone in Lakeside Bluffs knew Greg Wallace had been led away in handcuffs, looking like a powdered donut. But they didn't know why. They thought it was a misunderstanding, a mistake. I intended to correct that. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent the hours between 2 a.m. and dawn organizing the files Travis had given me, printing logs, highlighting bank transfers, blowing up screenshots of Greg's illegal surveillance feed until they were poster-sized. At 8 a.m., I didn't go to the police station. I went to the edge of my property, right where the public road meets the HOA entrance. I set up a simple folding table, a podium, and a sign that read, HOA Safety, Update, The Truth. I invited 3 people specifically, the editor of the County Gazette, the sheriff's deputy, who hated Greg, and Travis. But I knew the rest would come on their own. And they did. Neighbors walking dogs, joggers, people driving by who slowed down to look. Within 20 minutes, I had a crowd of 40 people. I stood up. I didn't use a megaphone. I didn't need one. The silence was loud enough. Morning, I said. Most of you saw the lights last night. Most of you heard the rumors. I picked up the first poster board. It showed a grainy night vision photo of a bedroom window. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This, I said, pointing to the image, is the master bedroom of the Miller family, 3 streets over, taken 2 nights ago. Mrs. Miller, standing near the back, covered her mouth with her hand. And this, I flipped the board, is the timestamp, taken by a camera hidden in the community oak tree, installed by Greg Wallace, paid for by your HOA dues. The murmurs started instantly, angry, shocked. Greg didn't just watch me, I continued, my voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. He watched you. He built files on you. Who comes over? What time you leave? Who you're sleeping with? I dropped a stack of papers on the table. Thud. These are the logs, courtesy of an internal source who couldn't stomach it anymore. I saw Travis in the crowd, head down, wearing a hoodie. He gave me the tiniest nod. But Greg is just the muscle, I said. Muscle needs money. I picked up the second stack of papers, bank records. Karen Manning, I said the name clearly. Across the street, inside the HOA office, I saw the blinds twitch. She was watching. Karen authorized security overtime payments of $4,000 a month to a consulting firm registered to Greg's wife. She authorized equipment upgrades that were actually kickbacks for vendor contracts. I held up the emails. Here she is, in her own words, telling Greg to, quote, find dirt on the winemaker so we can seize his land for the expansion. The crowd wasn't murmuring anymore. They were shouting. People were turning toward the HOA office, pointing, pulling out phones. This isn't a community, I said, looking straight at the office window where I knew she was hiding. It's a piggy bank for a failed cop and a corrupt president. I stepped back from the podium. The sheriff has these files. The state attorney has these files. And now, you have them. I left the papers on the table. By noon, 4 board members had resigned via email, claiming they had no knowledge of the operations. By 1 p.m., a news van from the city arrived. And by 3 p.m., I watched Karen Manning run out the back door of the community center, loading boxes into her trunk like a thief in the night. She thought she could outrun the paperwork. She was wrong. The trap had caught the rat. Now it was coming for the queen. There is a specific time of day that career criminals fear most. It's not midnight. Midnight is when they feel safe. Midnight is when they own the dark. No. The time they fear is 5 a.m., the hour of the wolf. The hour when sleep is deepest, defenses are lowest, and the warrant is signed. We called it Operation Light. I wasn't part of the stack that hit Greg's door. I'm a civilian now, my badge is in a drawer, but I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the convoy of unmarked black SUVs roll silently past my vineyard, turning left into Lakeside Bluffs. They didn't use sirens, not yet. Andy called me 10 minutes later to fill in the blanks. At 5:14 a.m., the state attorney's task force breached the front door of Greg Wallace's home. Greg didn't come out fighting. For all his bluster, for all his tactical talk and fake badges, when the real door kickers arrived, he crumbled. They found him in his hallway, wearing boxer shorts and a stained t-shirt, trying to shove a hard drive into a microwave. He didn't even get it turned on before he was on the ground, zip-tied, and read his rights. But the arrest wasn't the disturbing part. The search was. What they found inside that house turned this from a case of harassment into a nightmare. In Greg's garage, his command center, they found the server Travis had warned me about. But it wasn't just logs. It was a shrine, dozens of monitors, hard drives labeled by address, and on the wall, a map, a floor-to-ceiling map of lakeside bluffs and the surrounding area. Color-coded pins marked every house, blue for compliant, yellow for watch list. And right in the center, circling my vineyard, was a thick red marker line. Inside the circle, he'd scribbled one word, target, but it got worse. Inside the master bedroom closet, they found a cache of weapons that would make a cartel nervous. 3 AR-15s with filed-off serial numbers, a modified taser illegally ramped up to dangerous voltage, and a box of plastic restraints, flex cuffs, enough to detain a dozen people. He wasn't just playing sheriff. He was preparing for a war that only existed in his head. If I hadn't set that trap, if I hadn't triggered him early, God knows what he would have done with those zip ties. While the task force was dismantling Greg's life, another team was looking for the queen, Karen Manning. She hadn't gone home after the press conference. She'd run. But people like Karen, people who have lived their whole lives in a bubble of petty authority, don't know how to disappear. They don't know how to ditch a phone, or swap cars, or stay off the grid. They panic. At 6:45 a.m., a state trooper spotted a luxury Lexus speeding down the interstate, 50 miles from the state line. When they pulled her over, she didn't run. She locked the doors and screamed. She screamed that she was the president of the association. She screamed that this was a conspiracy. She screamed until the glass broke and they dragged her out. In the trunk, they found 2 suitcases. One was filled with clothes. The other was filled with $140,000 in cash, money drained from the HOA's emergency repair fund just hours before the accounts were frozen. By 9 a.m., the sun was fully up over my vineyard. The SUVs were gone. The sirens had faded. My phone buzzed. A text from Andy. Short, professional. Both in custody. Evidence secured. It's over. I looked out at the rows of vines, stretching green and calm toward the horizon. The dew was drying on the leaves. The birds were singing. The watchers were gone. The cameras were dark. The shadow that had been hanging over my land for weeks had finally, completely vanished. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than it had in years. But I knew there was one act left. The arrest is just the beginning. The real end happens in a courtroom. And I intended to be in the front row. Courtrooms have a specific smell: floor wax, old wood, and nervous sweat. It's a smell I hadn't breathed in years. But walking into the county superior court that Tuesday morning, it felt like putting on an old coat. Heavy, familiar. The trial took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of jury selection. 3 weeks of expensive defense lawyers trying to paint Greg Wallace as an overzealous community guardian and Karen Manning as a victim of circumstances. They tried to make it about property lines. They tried to make it about zoning laws. But you can't argue with video. On the 4th day, the prosecution played the footage from the honeypot night. The courtroom was dead silent as the jury watched Greg on the large monitors. They saw him creeping through the dark. They saw him trespassing. They saw him hacking a private system. But the nail in the coffin wasn't the video, it was the audio. Travis, nervous, shaking Travis, took the stand, and he brought the recordings. The jury listened to Greg's voice, recorded in his own garage, bragging to a buddy on the phone. Once I plant the evidence, the winemaker is gone. Then we take the land. Karen's already got a buyer lined up for the expansion. Gasps rippled through the gallery. I sat in the front row, watching Greg's back. He didn't turn around. His shoulders were hunched. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the shrinking posture of a bully who realizes the teacher is finally watching. Karen refused to look at anyone. She stared at her hands, weeping silently, playing the part of the fragile old lady. It didn't work. Not after the forensic accountant took the stand and showed where the $40,000 in cash came from. It came from the neighborhood's roof repair fund, from the playground maintenance budget, from the pockets of the very people sitting behind me in the courtroom. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't look at the defendants. I looked at the jury. I told them about the drones, the cameras, the intimidation, the fear my neighbors felt seeing a fake police car parked outside their homes at midnight. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, I told them. These two turned it into a prison. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the air in the room felt electric, that heavy, static silence that comes before a lightning strike. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for abuse of power, asked the foreman for the verdict. I watched Greg. He was trembling, actually trembling. On the charge of conspiracy to commit extortion, guilty. On the charge of aggravated stalking, guilty. On the charge of possession of unregistered firearms and modification of weapons, guilty. The list went on, 18 counts in total. Then came the sentencing. The judge looked over her glasses at Greg Wallace. "Mr. Wallace," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor, "you took an oath once as a police officer, and you lost it. Then, you created a fantasy world where you could abuse that power again. You terrorized this community, not for safety, but for ego. I sentence you to 24 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Greg's knees buckled. His lawyer had to hold him up. He let out a sound, half sob, half gasp, that echoed off the high ceilings. Then the judge turned to Karen. "Mrs. Manning, you were trusted to protect this community. Instead, you treated it as your personal bank account. You funded a private militia to harass an innocent man. I sentence you to 18 years. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full restitution of $450,000 to the HOA funds." Karen wailed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. The sound of a life of privilege shattering against a concrete wall. But the judge wasn't finished. She banged her gavel once to silence the room, then looked at the remaining members of the HOA board sitting in the gallery. "Furthermore," she declared, "evidence has shown that the Lakeside Bluffs Homeowners Association has become a criminal enterprise. By court order, the current board is hereby dissolved immediately. An independent trustee will be appointed to manage the community until fair, monitored elections can be held." The courtroom erupted, not with anger, with applause. Real, sustained applause. My neighbors, people I'd barely spoken to for years, were hugging each other. Some were crying. The reign of terror was over. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out into the hallway. Andy was waiting for me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. "Justice?" he asked. I looked back at the heavy oak doors, where bailiffs were leading Greg and Karen away to their new lives in 6x8 cells. "Yeah," I said. "Justice." We walked out of the courthouse together, stepping into the bright, warm afternoon sun. The air tasted different out here, cleaner, lighter. It tasted like freedom. 6 months later. The silence returned to the vineyard, but it wasn't the heavy, watchful silence of before. It was the clean silence of growth, the silence of wind moving through heavy vines, the silence of a hawk circling high above, hunting for field mice, not for leverage. I spent the morning of the Harvest Festival walking the perimeter. The expanded observation zone was gone. The cameras in the trees, gone. I took the last one down myself, tossed it into the recycling bin, and watched the garbage truck crush it into scrap plastic. The drones don't fly anymore. The neighborhood has changed too. With the king and queen of Lakeside Bluffs serving federal time, the fear evaporated. People wave now, real waves, not the nervous, check who's watching waves. Travis was elected the new HOA president. He didn't want the job. He tried to run away when they nominated him. But that's exactly why he's perfect for it. He dismantled the enforcement committee on his first day. Now, the HOA worries about what it's supposed to worry about: pool maintenance and flower beds. I reached the front gate, the same gate where Greg had stood, and demanded my obedience. I drilled a new sign into the wood, solid oak, brass lettering. I made it myself. It reads, "Private property, cameras recording, sheriffs by appointment only, no HOA jurisdiction beyond this point." I stood back and admired it. It wasn't a warning, it was a fact. By sunset, the tables were set under the arbor. This time, there were no flashing lights, no tactical vans, no screaming men covered in yeast, just friends, neighbors, even a few of the folks who used to be afraid to look at my house. The smell of slow-roasted pork and wood smoke filled the air. Bottles of my best reserve Cabernet were being uncorked. The sound of laughter, loud, genuine laughter, drifted up toward the stars. Andy Morales was there, off duty, beer in hand, laughing with Travis about something. I watched them from the edge of the patio. A young couple from the neighborhood walked up to me. They were holding glasses of my wine. "We just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, for standing up. We didn't think anyone could stop them. I smiled. "Vines have deep roots," I said. "They don't pull up easy." As the night went on and the fire pit burned down to glowing embers, I tapped a spoon against my glass. The chatter died down. 50 faces turned toward me. I raised my glass. The deep red wine caught the firelight, glowing like a ruby. I looked at the land I loved. I looked at the people who were finally free to be neighbors again. "To freedom," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet night. "To boundaries." I paused, looking toward the empty road where Greg's Tahoe used to prowl. "And to the absolute pleasure of never letting small men play big cops." "Hear, hear!" Andy shouted. Glasses clinked. The sound rang out like a bell. I took a sip. It was the best vintage I had ever made. It tasted like victory.